I think the problem we're having today with like a bit of mind fog is we just don't have that constant stream of Nick-isms to kind of keep us on our toes, you know? Like he's great for like coming in with a little bit of shenanigans, but then a really great thought to keep the conversation going. So Nick, if you're listening at home, we miss you.
Yeah, and sign the petition at www.bringbackJollySaintNick.
Bring back Jolly Saint Nick.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Lights Out podcast. This is your host, David Vuyk, and I'm joined by my co-host, Eric Nekich. Unfortunately, jolly old St. Nicholas is off today, preparing for the big event coming at the end of December, but we're here to keep the show rolling and to talk a little bit about automation ROI.
Man, that was a good intro. I actually heard that Nick was off today fixing up his RV so that he could drive to his cousin Clark's house for the holiday season.
That's so weird. That's like a deja vu. I feel like I've heard this story before.
Good to see you, my guy. How you doing?
Yeah, good, man. It's been a busy couple months, but I'm really excited for the upcoming holiday season. And, 2026 is right around the corner. So we're going to have this, blank canvas to just start a new year and take everything to the next level, including this podcast, which I'm super excited about. How about you?
You know what? Same. Just getting ready for the season of thankfulness and gratefulness. And like closing the lids on things and coming out swinging fresh canvas in 2026.
Yeah.
And I think that honestly is probably a perfect segue into getting this episode started. So I'm going to throw something at you, David.
Hit me.
And I want to just, maybe this will start the dialogue. Right? So as you know, we were recently at AMT, sponsors the MT Forecast event.
Yeah, that's right.
And we were there just learning about 2026, what we think's coming down the pipe. And interesting note, one of the speakers mentioned that over the last year, there's been a 30% increase in the adoption rate of automation by manufacturers.
That's insane. That's insane. 30% is a big number for 1 year. And did they kind of allude to why they think that might be?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a big reshoring push right now in the States. A lot of that has to do, I think, with some of the recent tariff legislation. But maybe that initiative was in play before the whole tariff thing came through. Mm-hmm. But what hasn't changed, right? The beach hasn't risen to meet the tide, if you will, right? So there's still a labor shortage. The skills gap's very real. There's still some serious cost drivers at play. So you've seen a 30% increase in adoption rate, but I wonder what that is. I wonder how much that's meeting the demand, if you will.
Okay. Yeah. Like maybe that's just the tip of the iceberg, and into 2026, we're going to see even bigger numbers. Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like automation has just become that much more accessible in recent years. It's become a little bit more normalized. Maybe some of those fence sitters who resisted it for whatever reason, maybe the cost, maybe because, technology is intimidating, whatever. Maybe, they're starting to see that, hey, if I want to stay in business, if I want to remain competitive, I actually have to start embracing some of this stuff. Do you think those factors are at play? I mean, do you see that in your day-to-day on the workholding side and the shop automation side?
Absolutely. I mean, that's been, I think, a common theme. I honestly thought we would see adoption rates like this in 2024, and they just, for whatever reason, didn't come to fruition, right? So it's interesting that you use the term fence sitter. That is something that I think people in and around automation have dealt with now for a significant amount of time. So let's talk about fence sitting in general and some ways that if you are sitting atop that fence, you may be able to make the decision to move off it one way or another, right? I think that probably if we look at the shops that are adopting automation and, just advanced manufacturing technology at a high rate, I think what they're going to all have in common is the ability to quantify the ROI quickly and accurately.
Right. Absolutely.
So knowing that one of the key decision-making drivers is just having a good sense of ROI, being able to calculate it quickly and accurately, why does ROI matter so much more than cool tech? And is cool tech a trap in the automation game?
Yeah, well, that's interesting. So I think a lot of folks love the idea of automation, love the idea of having something flashy on the shop floor because when you do shop tours and bring customers in, it shows that your automation posture is visibly there. But without the ROI, then the math doesn't work, and that can become a great big expensive paperweight, and that's a real shame for a lot of reasons. But that's a big drain on the business. So one thing that maybe I've not struggled with, but never always been perfectly clear on is maybe what all goes into establishing that ROI, because it's really a projection, right? When you're starting off.
Paul, tell me about your trip to Italy.
I went there with the NTMA and we got to tour SMW Autoblok, two different facilities. Absolutely blew me away. World class, enormous places. I can't even count how many machines there were, but so much automation. One of the most incredible takeaways for me was the breadth of what they made. I did not know they made so many work holding products and automation products. And I loved watching a big chuck machine a little chuck. So they were machining chucks in huge lathes. I thought that was super fun.
Yeah, you introduced them to me after you came back, and they've been to my shop. And the ideas they have to like breathe new life into some of my machines and the tools and the jobs that we're running was just shocking.
And then one of the coolest things is we're bringing this new automated pallet delivery system, the Hennig workflow, to market. And guess what the interface is? It's SMW 0-point locators. It's really sweet.
We're getting ready to get some of those.
So how do people find SMW Autoblok to look through that massive catalog of products?
It's SMW Autoblok, BLOK.com.
Yeah, get rid of that. SMW Autoblok, BLOK.com.
What kind of questions would you ask a shop if you're working alongside them trying to, establish that ROI?
Yeah, I think number one is the process that we're trying to automate. What is the core goal, right? Are we trying to redeploy people into more value-added positions? Are we just trying to consistently feed a machine lights out 24/7 to just keep parts flying out? So I think step one is, what's the vision, right? Why this process and why now?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure in a lot of cases, the why now comes down to wanting to stay competitive, wanting to increase capacity, wanting to meet demand, wanting better quality. It could be one of those. It could be all of those kind of at once. And to be clear, we're not just talking about payback period on the investment itself. We're talking about what can that investment do to increase our margin in the future. So anyone who's really business oriented about their shop and growing it, should be really excited about kind of going through this exercise.
Absolutely. I think that, one, to your point, right now we've identified the process that we're trying to automate. We have a general idea of the ROI we want to try to capture. And like you said, it could be as basic as just, when is this thing going to start paying for itself? But it could get a lot more detailed. So do you have any input on, is there a certain process that eludes to a certain ROI calculation, or is it really just sort of an any port in the storm type situation? If I can't get enough people, right, the metric or the ROI I'm looking for in an automation system is, I think, a lot different than if I'm just trying to maybe pull the variance out of a process, right? So if I'm trying to pull a variance out of a process, I think I'm looking for an ROI calculation on, maybe throughput or rolled throughput, right? How many good work pieces go into a process versus how many good parts come out the other side, right? If I'm in a situation where I have a labor shortage, or I'm trying to redeploy some valuable personnel into other areas, the ROI is different than throughput, right? The ROI maybe has more of a salary hook or component to it. So when people are determining where and how to calculate ROI, I'd love your input on how much weight they should put into the actual process that they're automating.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, right? Because sometimes where your mind might go with this is to look at the process you're automating and compare the ROI against the old way, which is a fine way to do it. So maybe you look at it as labor hours saved because it used to be a manned process and now it's an automated or a semi-automated process. But it goes a little bit deeper than that because if you save those labor hours, you can now redeploy those labor hours somewhere else. So it's kind of a twofold calculation in that you can now take those labor savings and deploy them somewhere else and really magnify what that ROI looks like now in a different process, maybe wherever the next bottleneck is, or process improvements somewhere else in the flow.
That's outstanding. Before we actually get into like this pre-automation snapshot that I see you've laid out, it's beautiful. And we're actually going to give the audience some basic metrics that they can start using, right? But I think, one thing that I would love you to talk on would be when I'm calculating ROI, am I incorporating upstream and downstream processes in that ROI calculation?
Let me flip that back on you, Eric. Because you may have done a few more. You may have done a few more ROI calculations than I have.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So if I'm implementing like an automation system because I'm just trying to build a more reliable process, right? I want to improve my throughput, right? Maybe it's a part that when it's manually loaded, there's a high opportunity for error, right? Whether it could be loaded in the wrong orientation, not tightened to the right specification. I mean, there's a number of things that could potentially go wrong, right? Especially with certain more detailed processes. But let's say I want automation because I want to take the human hands out of that, and I just want a stable, reliable process that increases my throughput. Winner, right? But now I've also achieved these productivity gains, right? Because the amount of time my machine might be idle while someone's away from it waiting to swap that part, right? Lunch breaks, bathroom breaks. Now, in theory, I could run all weekend. So I guess to summarize my question is, I have implemented this system to achieve a very specific ROI, but there's a number of other benefits and potential hazards that could take that ROI up or even bring it down if I'm not careful and I'm creating tertiary bottlenecks on my shop floor.
So if I'm understanding you right, like don't calculate the ROI in a vacuum. Like if you're only focused on the step of the process that's being automated, you might undervalue the ROI in the broader context of the process, or perhaps misjudge where the true bottleneck is, or whatever might be the case. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think you might be leaving some money on the table, right? And I think if we back up a little bit, it actually maybe forces you to take a look at what you're investing in as a whole. We've said it a few times on this podcast, the amount of shops we're in when we see cobots still in the boxes on shop floors, right? Like you refer to it as a paperweight. Earlier this month, I had the pleasure of talking to one of the MEPs here in Wisconsin, and he was just great. And he made a comment like, if you're not careful about all those secondary processes around installing automation, all you've purchased with a cobot is a $60,000 coat hanger. And I thought that was brilliant,
Yeah, no, absolutely. In fact, cobots are an interesting topic, not to go off topic, but every automation integrator I talked to when cobots first became trendy a number of years ago were highly skeptical, mostly because, oftentimes you can get a more capable industrial robot, and the whole collaborative nature really depends on a lot of things in terms of the context within the process to make sure the safety protocols are there. And so I think a lot of people ran out and bought one thinking that, hey, I'm just going to install my own robot and that's really going to make things better. But there was no underlying plan or not a good enough plan and a good enough ROI calculation to support that purchase. And now you've got a whole bunch of cobots out in the world collecting dust, which would be a great example of where this can go wrong. And to touch really quickly on kind of like upstream versus downstream impacts of whether you're looking at a robot parts loader or a pallet system or whatever, Upstream, you might have less need for operator intervention. The nature of your setups might be changing. Your tooling strategy might be changing. Your cycle times might be more stable. So there's all these things that are kind of a byproduct of that integration, that change. Just to tie it back to what we were talking about of calculating that ROI in the context of the process, not just the process step. And I mean, downstream, there might be changes to your deburring and inspection process and all this kind of stuff. So it's really important to kind of have a holistic view when you're kind of going through this exercise.
Yeah, and I'm reading your notes here, and you have something brilliant in here, right? And I think that this summarizes everything you just said, is that ROI is a business metric, not a technology metric, right? There are probably more cases of people who thought they were saving money on a budget system, whether that's DIY or just saw something within their price range and were like, buy, and then found out that, like any poor process, you can't put a Band-Aid on it, right? If it's not the correct automation, if you haven't done your homework on the front end, you're not going to get a good ROI. I mean, it could potentially cost you more money if you're not careful.
Yeah, and these are important things, I think, to consider too. If you're a shop leader and you're getting pressure from the top to, maybe the owner of the business that you work for went out to a show and saw some automation technology, got really excited and jacked up, and came back and said, hey, you need to investigate something. We need to be more tech forward. These are some really tactical things that you can do to not just present options for what automation could be invested in, but to really present a plan where the math works on making that investment. And I think that's a great way for anyone who's kind of a shop floor leader to really stand out in kind of going through that process.
Yeah, it's awesome. So let's, just to quickly recap, right? I think step one, when it comes to a good ROI calculation, because I think the bulk of this episode should be spending a little time with the listeners on tactics. What are some metrics that anybody can take? How do you start taking them, right? But so to review before we move into that, step one, identify the process you want to automate, and that's where the bulk of your ROI should be. But step two is be cautious not to make that ROI calculation in a vacuum. You almost want to always look at the complete flow, start to finish. I mean, receiving dock to shipping dock, right? Receiving dock to customer hand,
Yeah, and then also kind of name the different direct costs that are impacted when you're looking at that. So an obvious one is labor savings, right? I mean, I think that's where everyone's mind goes to with automation.
100%. Yeah.
The next might be increased capacity. So maybe you're investing in something like a pallet pool that allows you to, run an extra shift or run very close to lights out. It could be a reduction in scrap and rework. So maybe, you're increasing process reliability, or you're reducing, your tooling costs. I know those are a lot of the things we talk about in the world of machine monitoring and process monitoring. But I think that's true of a lot of different shop floor technologies that you might be looking to establish an ROI on. Those are kind of the direct costs. I think there's more than that. I think there's, kind of the soft savings that are kind of more operational and strategic in terms of maybe, okay, now you've got reduced lead times. Your schedule might be more reliable than it was before. Your quality might be more consistent. And so those are kind of maybe a list of secondary benefits. But those are all, I think, really good metrics or factors that you would be considering when you're starting to outline that ROI.
Beautiful. Couldn't have said it better myself. I think the problem we're having today, with a bit of mind fog, is we just don't have that constant stream of Nick-isms to kind of keep us on our toes, He's great for coming in with a little bit of shenanigans, but then a really great thought to keep the conversation going. So Nick, if you're listening at home, we miss you.
Yeah, and sign the petition at www.bringbackJollySaintNick.
BringBackJollySaintNick.com,
so that he realized how much he's missed.
When you're trying to find equipment financing, Verdant Commercial Capital makes the process easy. With deep experience across 6 industries, including manufacturing, they tailor financing to fit your business, your goals, and your cash flow. Fast decisions, flexible options, and a team that really knows their stuff. When you're ready to grow, upgrade, or innovate, Verdant is the partner to call. Visit verdantcc.com/numbers or search for Verdant Commercial Capital on LinkedIn to learn more.
Good stuff. So, all right, let's move on to establishing our baseline, right? So, pre-automation snapshot. If you listen to this podcast regularly, you know we are all about the data.
Mm-hmm.
So, let's talk about 4 key pieces of data that people should be looking at before they decide on a system, right? And then we can get into the weeds on tools that are accessible to kind of track that data. And maybe some do's, don'ts, points of caution. You want to go first? What do you got?
Yeah, so I think what you need to be thinking about is if you want to prove a calculated ROI, you need to measure your current state. You need the before picture so that you can compare it against the after. And some of the key data points that you might be looking to capture are your current spindle utilization.
Okay.
That would be a big one. Your setup times per job. Now, if you're in a high mix environment where the same job doesn't come back, maybe you're going to take an average of 10 of your typical jobs or something like that. The average amount of operators per machine. I mean, some shops operate one person to one machine tool. Some shops you've got one guy running around like a crazy person. I only say that because it's so impressive when you see one guy keeping like 5 machines busy, because to me that seems like a lot to have on your mind. And then also some kind of calculation of what your direct labor cost is per part. But I think you could go beyond that. I think you'd also want to understand your machine burden per part and really understand the full job costing that goes into the components you make. Now, there's a lot of tools that can help you capture that data, but you can do it with a pen and paper. That is the reality. So don't let that kind of hold you back from actually capturing these details. Take the time, go out there, take a stopwatch, and record it, because it is really important to understand your current state. I don't know, Eric. I mean, I covered a few things there, but maybe you have some things to add to that.
No, I think that those are 4 great. They're really great metrics, and honestly, they're accessible metrics to basically every CNC shop, small, medium, large, right? So let's go back through them and let's just talk kind of around them. What are some very basic ways we can start grabbing that metric, and what are maybe some more advanced solutions out there? Because, I think it's worth noting that, like spindle utilization, right? Let's start here. This is something you can get with a pen and a sheet of paper, right? I think most machine tools are built with a very basic function to be able to report, give you somewhat of an accurate picture into how often your spindle is running, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
We've talked before that spindle utilization on its own isn't always like a great metric. Like you could have awesome spindle utilization, right? But be making crappy parts.
Totally.
So you could have awesome spindle utilization because you're not using your table capacity wisely, right? So it's not like a catch-all, win-all, but it's a very important baseline metric. And so again, there's some very basic means out there for grabbing this metric, but there's also some other technology that's available. And I'm curious, with your experience in sort of that industry, if you wanted to shed some light on some things that are available.
Yeah. So, I mean, something that is helpful if you have it would be basic machine monitoring, which is going to give you really accurate data on what that spindle utilization is and kind of categorizing both the uptime and the downtime, which kind of gives you an added layer of depth beyond just a strict percentage of utilization. So, there's lots of great machine monitoring companies out there, but that would be a really easy way to get those numbers. Some ERP and MES systems, also have operator inputs so that they can record cycle times and uptime versus downtime. So you might get the data that way as well. So yeah, it could be machine monitoring, which is kind of more automatic. It could be ERP MES, which is a manual operator input. Or, like I said originally, you could just sit there with a pen and paper and a stopwatch and just track a shift or something like that too.
Sure. Sounds like an amazing use of someone's time also.
It certainly makes the case for, there's a lot of low cost machine monitoring out there, which would make the math works versus having a skilled person out there with a stopwatch.
Correct me if I'm wrong. You're 100% right. But correct me if I'm wrong. Some of these monitoring softwares are so easy to install that there are companies out there that literally will walk you through it on the phone. Like they don't even have to step foot in your shop to get you started.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure some of those companies even they send you a package with a quick start guide and you're off to the races really quick.
I love it.
So it doesn't have to be intimidating.
No, great stuff. All right, number 2 you listed was setup time per job. This is where I'm gonna go off on a bit of a little tangent. So people,
can I ask you one clarifying question before you draw on your years of expertise and
please
hit us with your wisdom? How do you define setup times? Because sometimes that includes tearing down the previous job. Sometimes it doesn't, and people seem to kind of define it differently. So when we're talking about it now, what are we talking about?
So I always like the easiest way I could describe it is work piece preparation, right? Okay. So we are preparing the work to turn the spindle on effectively, right? So that could be as simple as pulling a part out of a vise and putting a new part in. That could be tearing down a fixture and rebuilding another one. Setup time can be seconds. Setup time can be hours, right? We've heard all of it. We've seen all of it. And that's kind of where I wanted to go with this, right? Step 1, look inside your machine. If there is this gigantic, bulky dinosaur fixed jaw vise in there, before you buy a robot, I command you to take a hard look at your work holding. I think that, putting one before the other is a catastrophic mistake. If you want to build a reliable process and reduce your setup time, I can't stress it enough. It's going to start with your fixturing. It's going to start on that machine table, and it will be a much easier process to automate if you build it and get your reps in with a manual modular work holding setup to start. So I don't care if you're coming from a dedicated work holding world, a traditional vise setup, or maybe you have started to break into modular work holding. You need to be looking at systems that have high repeatability, can be exchanged quickly, are rigid, reliable, and provide great access to that workpiece, because it's not just a spindle that's going to need access to that fixture, to that workpiece, right? Your robot's going to be able to need to get it in and out of there. And that's a great segue into just understanding, workpiece exchange, or what I think a lot of people visualize when someone says the word machine tending, versus IFE, which is integrated fixture exchange. And that could be a pallet pull. That could be a system that actually pulls the fixture itself in and out of the machine. But it all is going to start with your work holding. And so please, people, when you are looking at your system,
how did I not see this coming? Eric, the work holding king, he's like, before we go too deep, we got to talk about work holding.
Sorry. I feel like you let out a nefarious giggle when you wrote setup time on that document. So.
Well, listen, I laugh about it, but it is a incredibly good point. If you got that fixed jaw vise on your table, as Eric said, go look at yourself in the mirror and ask the hard questions.
You cannot automate an unreliable process, and it's going to start with your fixturing. So if you're, measure your setup time per job, upgrade your fixturing, and then think about how you can automate that process. Sure. And with that, I digress. We'll move on to number 3. average operator load or machines per operator. I'll start with this one too, and then hand it over to you. Great example was my former employer, Fifth Axis. I remember they installed some automation on a few machines, and then they quickly went from one operator per machine to one operator was running 5 machines, several of them 5-axis machines. So it is one of the best. I think it's one of the best returns you get from automation. Is just you don't have to have someone there doing this repetitive, like, how do we build a serial killer type work? You know what I mean?
Well, I'm not sure I've ever heard it put that way, but I do know what you mean.
Hey, it's Paul from Making Chips. If you've been burned by recruiters who don't understand manufacturing, you are not alone. That's exactly why we created Hire MFG Leaders. We're not just recruiters, we're current and former shop owners, and we know what it takes to lead in this industry. Whether you're hiring your next operations leader, sales manager, or production supervisor, we'll help you find someone who actually fits. Learn more at makingchips.com/hire.
Yeah, so I think the takeaway there is that when you start to make process improvements, that could start with something like work holding. It definitely should start with something like work holding. You can start to build out a better process that enables your operators to go from single machine tending to multi-machine tending. And that alone is a huge performance improvement for any shop. But yeah, so start with calculating what the current state is, and have a bit of an idea of kind of what you'd like the future state to be as well, and then kind of come back and measure once you've kind of implemented whatever that solution is that you're running the ROI calculation for. Kind of tied to that then would be your labor cost per part, which obviously on a single operator, single machine tool setup is going to be a lot higher than having one person tending multiple machines. But you're going to want to, and I'll say it again, beyond just the labor cost, you want to understand what your direct costs are per part in the current system. So your machine burden as well as the labor component, I think, are two important things to measure there. And for all of these, again, there's a few ways to kind of record the data in terms of, a simple time study method, operator like self-reporting that data into an ERP system or onto their traveler or whatever the case is. Another like super low hanging fruit thing to do would be like stick a GoPro camera in that cell, in that machine, so that you can study it later. And then you've got timestamps for every step of the process. I mean, that's super low hanging fruit anyone can do if you don't have a technology component to record that for you.
Absolutely. I always think of these last two, like the average operator load and labor cost per part. Always brings me back to when we were in Switzerland at Swiss Modular, partner of ours, Triag Workholding. And, you're in Switzerland, the labor costs are expensive. The manufacturing costs per square foot are some of the most expensive in the world. And here they are turning out a competitive product, a profitable product, high quality, like it hits all the markers. And why? And there's, I don't know, maybe 6 people walking around there, right? But they've got these 5-axis machines, horizontal machines, pallet pools. Those things have been running 24/7 for almost 15 years.
That's incredible.
That was a bit of, they didn't have a choice, right? Baptism by fire, if you will. But the point is those two metrics were huge in impacting them, and they took action.
Yeah.
So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think, those are all great metrics. I think that there's another key metric that people at home should absolutely know about, especially when you're investing in a system, and that is your remaining labor percentage, right? Any automation system on the market is going to have a bit of a remaining labor percentage. So we always calculate that into our ROIs. If you have somebody, if you go with like an integrated fixture exchange, like a pallet pool system, right? Someone's going to be unloading and loading new work pieces back onto all those pallets. That encompasses your remaining labor percentage, right? So if you're doing like tending and you're pulling work pieces off a grid, someone has to be putting the work pieces on that grid so the robot's got something to grab, right? So understanding your remaining labor percentage And then understanding the thresholds, right? We've always kind of said, or I've heard that anything over 12%, you've missed something. Your automation is misfiring, right? I think that the higher, like your IFE systems tend to have a higher remaining labor percentage, but then there's other gains with flexibility and versatility that you get with a pallet system, right? Your basic tending systems will probably have a lower remaining labor percentage, but then you're losing a little flexibility. They tend to be a little more dedicated, you know.
Okay. So, and maybe just to back up for someone who's never heard the term remaining labor percentage before, that is the amount of time left to complete a job compared to what you originally estimated. So maybe is that correct, Eric, as a definition?
No, it would be after you automate the process, it would
Okay.
be the percentage of human interaction that remains in that process. Does that make better sense?
That makes sense. So how much human touch is still required for that process to operate?
Exactly. Whether they have to load raw stock on a grid, whether they have to actually swap out work pieces in a vise or onto a dedicated fixture or on and off a pallet, like whatever level of human interaction is left is your remaining labor percentage.
Okay, gotcha.
And I'm sure there's other words for it, right? That's just what I've always been trained to call it.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, I think that's kind of a great starting point for the listeners who might be kind of thinking about the upcoming year and wanting to maybe enhance their tech or their automation posture. It's a fancy way of saying, you know, improve their process by kind of starting to kind of understand what the baseline is, understand the current state, to start to work that into that ROI calculation. I think we're planning to kind of go a little deeper on this topic in the next episode. Is that right, Eric?
Yeah, absolutely. I really want to, they always say vision, then strategy, then tactics, right? So
Sure.
I really want to get into the core of the tactics in the next episode. What's the right way to calculate ROI? Talk about some differentiators and really give the folks at home, some strong metrics to start working with.
Awesome. Well, so maybe as a wrap for today's episode, then what are a few takeaways or a few action items we can kind of leave the listeners with if they actually want to go to their shop floor and start taking some steps?
Yeah, homework time. Everyone, turn the volume up. All right. I would say step one would be, instead of getting into like the individual process, what are just your top 3 bottlenecks in your shop right now, this point in time?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great starting point. So just understand what those top 3 bottlenecks are, those top 3 problems that you think you want to solve with technology. Name them, list them out. What would be kind of a good next step?
Probably, start grabbing some of those metrics we just talked, right? What's the current cycle setup, operator touch time,
Okay.
and just start getting a baseline of kind of the current state.
Yep, absolutely. And also maybe just coming up with like an effective hourly rate per machine or per cell, depending on how your shop is set up and how you kind of bill out your different machines. So understanding kind of the revenue per machine divided by the hours that it's available to come up with that hourly rate as well, which would be an important component of an ROI calculation. Yeah, so that's kind of a great plan of action, everybody. Get out there, identify your top 3 bottlenecks that you want to address, measure your current state, get that all kind of nailed down on a piece of paper, and bring it with you to the next episode in this series where we'll keep building on this idea of modeling ROI.
I love that. Yeah, bring it with you to the next episode. We're going to dissect that further. That's great stuff. David?
Yeah, absolutely. Likewise, Eric, great conversation. I'm excited for the next episode and going a little deeper on this. I think it's going to be really helpful to folks who are ready to really take 2026 seriously and step up their game with automation. So for now, we're going to turn the lights out on this episode. And until then, Eric, give us an outro.
Thank you, David. That is a wrap for this episode of the Lights Out podcast. Huge thanks to my cohort, David, for just bringing some amazing talking points today. And Nick, wherever you are, know that you were missed. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone in your shop who's ready to level up their automation game. You can find all your episodes plus extra content and resources at makingchips.com, wherever you listen to your podcasts. Until next time, keep your spindles turning and your lights out. And don't forget to bring your homework to the next episode.